So a variable is really nothing more than a storage place in memory where we can put a value. That storage place gets a name so that we can easily get that value back out of the memory and use it in our code. And unlike other programming languages, we don't have to deal with the memory location, pointers, we don't have to deal with memory addresses. The PHP preprocessor, all of the plumbing that makes the PHP language, does all of that for us. So here I'm demonstrating how to create a variable that's going to store a number. So I give it a name. The name of the variable is integer variable, and I put the number 42 in that variable, in that memory location. Then I create a string variable, and I put a string in that memory location. And then likewise with a decimal value, I call it double variable. That's just a name. And so in memory, I get 3 locations in memory, 3 storage places. Each of those storage places contains the values that I asked PHP to put there, and it has a name associated with that storage location, so that in the next set of code, I'm using the echo statement, I can go to that memory location and retrieve that value with nothing more than the name that I gave it. So I'm echoing the integer variable, I'm echoing the string variable, and I'm echoing the double variable. In PHP, unlike other programming languages, PHP variables are loosely typed. That means we don't have to tell PHP the type, the data type that we're going to store in a variable. Again, much of the abstraction here of the memory management done by the PHP preprocessor is what makes PHP such a popular and powerful language. In this case, again, I've created those 3 memory locations, those storage areas in memory, with the names integer variable, string variable, and double variable. Those values that I assign went into those memory locations. But then down below in the second set of assignments, I put the number 42 in the memory location that was previously storing the string value. Then in the integers, those memory locations I was using in the integer variable to store a number, now is storing a string. And the same thing with the double variable that I had created that was previously storing a decimal value is now storing a string value. And I've done nothing but assign values to those memory locations. So this demonstrates how PHP handles for us the data typing that we would otherwise have to do ourselves in other programming languages. So we can put values in memory that are of this type, recall those values using the integer name or using the variable name. Then we can store something else, a different type, in that same memory location. Using the same name we had used to store an integer, we can now use it to store a different type. So this makes PHP amazingly flexible in the way that we can deal with and manage our variable data. So let's go look at some code. Okay, just to demonstrate the PHP code that created the variables, here is the little code snippet that we saw on this slide. Again, we're creating 3 variables. One variable that's going to store the number 42, another variable that's going to store a string, and another variable that's going to store a decimal value, and the names associated with those variables. So this is our code, and I come over to my Firefox and load that page, and I get those values generated by the echo statement, that the variable integer value was storing the value 42. The string variable was storing the value I love this course, and the double variable was storing the value of pi to 5 digits. So pretty straightforward. We create the variable, we create the storage area in memory simply by executing this statement. The PHP plumbing, the underlying abstraction layer in PHP, does all of the hard work for us in going out and getting the memory, making sure it's the right size, getting the address of the memory, putting that value in the memory, and then down here, allowing us to retrieve that value simply by using the name. So very straightforward. And then to further demonstrate the flexibility of the variables in PHP, here again we have our variable creation with the three variables that are storing, again, an integer, a string, and a double value. And we print those out. Then I put a break here, a delineator, and I wanted to demonstrate how the loose typing of the PHP language makes this use of variables so easy and flexible for us. So I take the variable that was here storing a string, and instead I decide, I'm tired of storing strings in here. I'm going to store a number. And where I was storing a number, I'm now storing a string. And so let's see how this works in our preprocessor and pass through to our browser. So here we go. Refresh the window, and we get these are the initial values in the variables. Here's my break line, and then here is the values from the reassignment into those same variables. So you can see again the demonstration of the flexibility of the loose typed variables in PHP. Okay, just to beat this horse to death, let's just reiterate that in PHP, variables are loosely typed. That means we do not have to tell PHP the type of the data that we're going to store, nor do we have to store the same type throughout the life of the variable. But there are some rules. There are some rules to using variables, and the rules are these: that all variables must begin with the $sign. The name that comes after the $sign must begin with a letter or an underscore. So for example, the variable named $2 variable is not allowed. It will generate an error because it begins with a number. And the names of the variables are limited to the characters A through Z, the numbers 0 through 9, although they cannot begin with the numbers 0 through 9, and the underscore. And it's important to remember that variable names are case sensitive. So uppercase and lowercase mixed in the variable name results in two different variables because they will have two different names based on the upper and the lowercase. So how do we create a variable? Well, we don't. PHP does that for us. The plumbing, the underlying abstraction layer of memory management, of variable management in PHP allows us to just not even have to pay attention to that. So to create a variable, all we have to do is create a variable and assign to it in our code. So it's as simple as $sign my variable equals 42. When the PHP preprocessor sees that, it will create a variable in memory that will store the number 42. And then we can, wherever in our code, go back and recall that value 42 by using our variable name. But variables have lifespans. They have an area within the code in which the variable is accessible. And so with PHP, there are three scopes to variables. We call this scopes. The lifespan, the area within which the variable exists and can be accessed, is referred to as scope. Local scope is you create a variable in a snippet of code, and that variable is accessible and exists within that snippet of code. A global variable is accessible and exists throughout the code. And a static variable, which is a variable that does not change, its value does not change. So we're going to do an exercise now to demonstrate some of these variable techniques. We're going to create a web page that has PHP code to display, hello, whatever your name is, welcome to the world of PHP. Now, instead of just typing your name there after the hello, we're going to use a variable to store the value of your name. And using that stored value in the string in the echo statement, and then load the web page onto the server and display it in the browser. Now again, this isn't amazingly complex piece of code, but it does demonstrate the basic syntax for creating a variable by assignment and then using that variable in the code. And as we move forward and we gain more confidence and comfort with our, number one, our environment, and number two, with PHP code, the exercises will increase in complexity.